Let's start off with the principles of faith. And I want to start off with what happened in Galatians, because it starts forming the whole principle that Paul was about. In Galatians 1, verse 6 to 9, the things happened that led up to the Acts 15 meeting. I am astounded that you are so quick to remove yourselves from me, the one who called you by the Messiah's grace, and turn to some other supposedly good news, which is not good news at all. What is really happening is that certain people are pestering you and trying to pervert the genuine good news of the Messiah. But even if we, for that matter, an angel from heaven were to announce to you some so-called good news, contrary to the good news we did announce to you, let him be under a curse forever. We said it before, and I say it again. If anyone announces good news contrary to what you received, let him be under a curse forever. There is something that Paul is saying here that needs a little bit of clarification. He's talking to people who are bringing another sort of good news, which he says is not good news at all. And he says those people are pestering you and trying to pervert the good news of the Messiah. Obviously, when we get to this a bit further, these people were telling them that they needed to adhere to the whole Torah and that they should be circumcised. But obviously, this is what is objecting to. Even if we, or for that matter, an angel from heaven, were to announce to you some so-called good news, an angel from heaven, one needs to understand that he is actually speaking into the synagogue situation here. Because in the synagogue, there is a person by the name of the Chazan. And the role of the Chazan is he is the chairman of the synagogue. And the Chazan of the synagogue is also known as the angel of the synagogue. So, in a specific way, he's actually saying that the synagogue is coming to you and trying to give you another good news, which is different from the good news that I gave you. And he's therefore speaking about the good news that is so-called from the synagogue. This contrary good news, he actually considers to be a total curse. And he, in his way of speaking, is actually saying that it is a total curse and that one needs to stay away from it completely. In Galatians 2, verses 1 to 5, he says, "Then after 14 years, I again went up to Jerusalem, to the city of the inheritance of perfection, because the word shalom, from which the shalom is derived, actually means perfection in every area of your life. May you be complete in everything in your life." So this is perfect prosperity, perfect health, perfect peace, perfect anything that you can think is included in the word shalom. And this time with Barabbas, and I took with me Titus. Now, this name Barnabas is an interesting name because this is the Hebrew name Barabbas for Barabbas. And Bar means son, and Abba means father. So he took with him the son of the father. I went in obedience to a revelation, and I explained to them the good news as I proclaim it among the Gentiles. But privately, to the acknowledged leaders, I did this out of concern that my current or previous work might not have been in vain. Paul is actually talking to the situation that he explains elsewhere, that the gospel was preached to him by Yeshua HaMashiach himself, and that he had learnt it from him, and that what he had learnt from Yeshua, he was preaching to the Gentiles. So 14 years later, and obviously this is immediately after this conflict where people said that this is an incorrect gospel, he went to these leaders privately, and he did this out of concern that he might have been spreading a false gospel. So you see that Paul, as a Pharisee, was very concerned that what he was teaching had to be absolutely correct. And therefore he went to Jerusalem, and he makes the point of saying that he took with him Titus. And then he says, but they didn't force my Gentile companion Titus to undergo Brit Milah. Brit Milah is circumcision. So he's saying, I went there, and they didn't say that circumcision was necessary because they left Titus alone. And this implies that they knew that Titus had not been circumcised. So he's starting to build up a case for the Galatians to understand that even if the synagogue tells you another story, this is not the truth. Indeed, the question came up only because some men who pretended to be brothers had been sneaked in. They came in surreptitiously to spy out the freedom we have in the Messiah Yeshua so that they might enslave us. Now, Paul's idea of enslavement is being enslaved to the law. And his idea of freedom is the freedom that the Spirit has to interpret the law. So the enslavement to the law is very much where the synagogue is. And therefore, once again, he's making the comment here that the synagogue had come in to try and spy on them and was trying to take away the Gentiles who had converted to becoming believers in the Messiah. Not even for a minute did we give in to them so that the truth of the good news might be preserved to you. So he did not give in to this at all, because the truth of the two good news had to be preserved. So he was saying that, well, there is those who are already circumcised, and what can we do about that? But here I took this guy who had not been circumcised to them in Jerusalem, in the city of the inheritance of perfection, and they did nothing. Paul is also acting in terms of something else. The other principle that he's acting upon is that the law goes out from Jerusalem. And therefore, to go and find out the truth, he had to return to Jerusalem, which actually also was where he studied under Gamaliel. An interesting thing about Gamaliel got up in the Sanhedrin, and he said when Peter and John were being judged there, he said that they should not do anything about Peter and John, but should leave them go. Because if what they were preaching was from God, they would not be able to suppress it at all. But if it was not from God, they would be able to suppress it. Just to remind you that Paul came from very solid teaching stock. And the solid teaching stock that he came from said that one should continuously give attention to the truth. What the Messiah has freed us for is freedom. Therefore stand firm and don't let yourselves be tied up again to a yoke of slavery, a slavery to the Torah. Mark my words, I will tell you that if you undergo Brit Milah, circumcision, the Messiah will be of no advantage to you at all. Again, I warn you, any man who undergoes Brit Milah is obligated to observe the entire Torah, because you actually become a Jew through that circumcision. You who are trying to be declared righteous by God through legalism have severed yourselves from the Messiah. You have fallen away from God's grace. For it is by the power of the Ruach, the Spirit, who works in us, because we trust and are faithful, that we confidently expect our hope of attaining righteousness to be fulfilled. When we are united with the Messiah Yeshua, neither being circumcised nor being uncircumcised matters. What matters is trusting faithfulness, expressing itself through love. In another place, he says that the entire Torah is love. All of the law is love. So this trusting faithfulness must express itself through love. And when it does not express itself through love, there is no freedom anymore. And he's saying, you're going through this process of having yourself circumcised. that obligates you to observe the entire Torah. Because this observation of the Torah that you're adhering to is actually returning to legalism, which by manner of speaking is returning you to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So he's freed us for freedom, and we need to stand firm, not to be tied up again. So this freedom that we have is the freedom that comes through the Spirit, because the Spirit teaches us to live in love, in loving kindness and in compassion, and not to be tied up again in a yoke of slavery. Mark my words that Messiah will be of no use to you whatsoever if you have yourselves circumcised. And you will have severed yourselves from the Messiah through legalism. And legalism is the way by which the synagogue approaches the scriptures. And unfortunately, it is a big problem to this day. For it is by the power of the Ruach who works in us, because we trust and are faithful, that we confidently expect our hope of attaining righteousness to be fulfilled. He says righteousness comes as a result of the power of the Spirit. And it comes because we trust that the voice that we hear is that of the Spirit. And when we are faithful to that, he actually leads us away from sin and leads us into righteousness. So these are the things by which he moves us away. For it is by the power of the Spirit who works in us that we trust and are faithful. And this actually talks into the whole issue of what was Abram's faith. Because by the power of the Spirit he trusted, and it was reckoned him to righteousness. So Paul is alluding to Abram when he starts saying this. He says that Abram's trust caused him to be faithful. And through that trust, that the power of the Spirit working in us is telling us what we need to know, we then attain righteousness. So this righteousness is not earned, because it is the Spirit who is building it in us for the Messiah. For when we are united with the Messiah Yeshua, neither being circumcised nor being uncircumcised matters. What matters is trusting faithfulness expressing itself through love. Colossians 2, verses 16 to 23. Do not let anyone pass judgment on you in connection with eating and drinking, or in regard to a Jewish festival, or Rosh Chodesh, new moon, or a Shabbat. These are shadows of things that are coming, but the body is of Messiah. Because when you listen to the Sabbaths and the feasts, according to the exposition of the Jewish synagogue, they will tell you all about a lot of other things, but they will not illustrate to you from the Torah that the complete message of the Torah is Messiah. And if the Torah says anything that is not Messiah, that must be ignored, because it will be incorrect interpretation. There are shadows of things that are coming. So shadows of things that are coming, it actually says that the feasts particularly, but also the Sabbath, has a power to predict the future. In other words, to bring prophecy to us. And then he says, don't let anyone deny you the prize by insisting that you engage in self-mortification or angel worship. Such people are always going on about some vision they've had, and they vainly puff themselves up by their worldly outlook. So he's saying, be careful when people come and tell you all sorts of fancy stuff that might sound as though it comes exactly from the Messiah, because it is not that. It is only self-mortification and angel worship. So it has no effect at all on what you do. They fail to hold to the head. So they fail to hold onto Yeshua, from whom the whole body, having received supply and being held together by its joints and ligaments, grows as Elohim makes it grow. The entire growth comes from the Messiah. If along with Mashiach you died to the elemental spirits of the world, then why, as if you still belong to the world, are you letting yourselves be bothered by its rules? Don't touch this, don't eat this, don't handle this. In other words, when the Torah starts becoming a set of rules that you have to keep, he's saying this is worthless. This is not telling you anything about the Messiah, because such prohibitions are concerned with things that are meant to perish by being used, and they are based on man-made rules and teachings. He's drawing this directly back to the synagogue, and he's saying all of these prohibitions that tell you all of this stuff is actually drawing you back into legalism. And they indeed do have the outward appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed religious observances, false humility and asceticism, but they have no value at all in restraining people from indulging their old nature. This word old nature that is here is quite interesting because it is flesh, and that word is sarx. And eventually that word sarx is a dead body, a carnal dead body. So Paul says that anyone who is not of the faith is actually a dead body. Paul is quite clear about what is on and what is not on. But it's also important to see what he is not saying. He's saying don't have anyone pass judgment on you because of these things. Because it's not the celebration of the feasts. It's not the eating and the drinking that tells you anything about Messiah. It is the meaning of these things that is of importance to you, and you should be adhering to those very, very carefully. In the process, he's saying that Messiah takes his entire body and he matures it. He matures it in righteousness and in growth away from sin, so that there will be no indulging of the old nature, but that where we will be going is that we will be moving in the direction of a true righteousness. A true righteousness that does not acknowledge the possibility that we are allowed to continue to sin, so that grace will become more. And this is all according to man-made rules and teachings. Now, what he's alluding to here is when one reads the Torah and the Spirit is not in you, you're not going to see the true meaning of what is written in the Torah, because you will be adhering to a lot of outward teachings and you will not be understanding the inward content. And that is what Paul is spending a lot of time on over here. So let us go and inquire Yeshua about exactly the same issue. When some Prushim and Torah teachers from Jerusalem came to Yeshua and asked him, why is it that your Talmudim break the tradition of the elders? They don't do Ntilat Yadayim before they eat. Ntilat Yadayim is not purely washing of hands. And it is written because it is meant to make you understand, why do you not do a ceremonial washing of the hands before you eat? This doesn't say you mustn't wash your hands before you eat, because he is doing this for a very specific reason. When he starts answering, he says, when they do Ntilat Yadayim, they pray a prayer. And the prayer that they pray is the following. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, good understanding to all who do them. This them alludes to the fear of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Because if you fear Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, you will actually keep the commands. And he starts immediately talking directly into that prayer by saying, why are you breaking the command of God by your tradition? Because the command of God, what I now referred to, refers to one of the Psalms and is also written in either the book of Proverbs or in the Wisdom of Solomon. I'm not quite sure, but I think it's in Proverbs. And then he says, for God said, honor your father and mother. So this is a law. This, honor your father and your mother, is a law. And anyone who curses his father and mother must be put to death. So he's saying, now you go and you say to your father and mother, what I have promised to give to God what I might have used to help you. This is how it is stated here, that what I might have used to help you, but in reality, it actually has one of two meanings. Either these guys were not honoring their fathers and mothers, or they were considering what they were giving their fathers and mothers as sacrifices. And therefore, the promising that to God actually means that they're giving a sacrifice to their father and mother, and by doing that, they're disobeying the law of honoring their father and mother, which means that when father and mother become elderly, if you truly respect them, you will be taking care of them. So he's saying, you wash your hands because it is the things that the elders taught you, and you pray a prayer, but you don't listen to what you're praying because you're breaking the exact law that you're saying that you're keeping by praying that prayer. So he's saying that your washing of your hands is a useless gesture. And then he's rid of his duty to honor his father or mother. Thus, by a tradition, you make null and void the word of God. You hypocrites. Yeshayahu was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is useless because they teach man-made rules as if they were doctrines. So here they take this man-made rule of washing the hands, they make a declaration that they're keeping the doctrines, and they're not doing that. Then he called the crowd to him, and he said, listen and understand this. What makes a person unclean is not what goes into his mouth. Rather, what comes out of his mouth is what makes him unclean. The disciples came to him and said, do you know that the Pharisees or Prushim were offended by what you said? He replied, every plant that my Father in heaven has not planted will be pulled up by the roots. So he's saying something that actually goes directly to the root of this whole thing. He's saying that what you're eating is not what makes you unclean. It is what you're doing and what you're saying that makes you unclean. And if you're doing things that make you unclean, what does it help to eat what is clean? Actually, what is clean is not what clean food is not what this is about. So he's not cancelling the whole issue of clean food, because clean food tells you everything about what is unclean. You see, a pig has a split hoof, but it does not ruminate. Its internal condition is unclean. Its external condition is clean, and therefore it is a symbol of a hypocrite. An ostrich cannot fly. What it is outwardly belies what it is, because it cannot fly. All of the animals who have soft feet are interesting animals, because a lot of them are carnivores and a lot of them are scavengers. And this actually means that hypocrisy is not on, scavenging is not on, murdering is not on, and he's actually alluding to all of these habits of animals that they have that make the animals images of what is unclean. And therefore he says it's what comes out of you that makes you unclean. And then they're offended by that. And then he says, every plant that my plant, the Father in heaven has not planted, will be pulled up by the roots. Let them be their blind guides. When a blind man guides another blind man, both will fall in the pit. So he's saying, these people are just simply in trouble. It is very messy what they're doing. So then Peter says, explain this parable to us. So Peter immediately cottons on that what Yeshua is saying is a parable. It is not a law. So he says, don't you understand even now? Don't you see that anything that enters the mouth, that enters the stomach, anything that enters the mouth goes out into the stomach and passes out into the latrine. So he's saying it's of no value. It actually is food. That's what it is. But what comes out of your mouth is actually coming from your heart, and that is what makes a person unclean. For out of the heart come forth wicked thoughts, murder, adultery, all kinds of sexual immorality, theft, lies, slanders. These are what really makes a person unclean. But with eating without doing, Ntilat Yadayim does not make a person unclean. So eating without washing your hands ceremonially does not make you unclean. What makes you unclean is breaking the law. He is quite clear about what clean and unclean is. Be careful to note that nowhere does he say, do not eat, because that simply was not in terms of what the Torah says. So Yeshua was very clear about it, and he was pointing out quite clearly what the problems were with the clean and the unclean of the Pharisees. What I'm doing in this process is to show you what Hebrew thought is. And Hebrew thought brings one to understanding things slightly differently. Obviously, there is much, much, much more depth in all of these words than this.